A rich woman paid me to pretend to be her daughter. I never imagined my life would change over a cup of coffee. At 22, I was barely scraping by, caught in an exhausting cycle of dead-end jobs and overdue bills. My world was small, a cramped studio apartment with creaky floors, a bed that doubled as a couch, and a tiny kitchenette stocked with cheap instant noodles. Every morning, I woke up to the same dull routine. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Loneliness had long since become my shadow. I had no family, no safety net. My mother passed away when I was 15, and my father had been nothing more than a ghost in my life. Foster care had been a revolving door of temporary homes and indifferent guardians, leaving me with the painful understanding that I was always replaceable. The idea of belonging somewhere, of being truly wanted, had never been more than a distant fantasy. Most days, I could ignore the ache in my chest, but there were moments, like that evening in the cafe, when the weight of it all pressed down on me. I was nursing a coffee I couldn't afford, flipping through job listings on my phone, when I noticed her. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention without trying, poised, elegant, draped in a navy blue coat that probably cost more than my entire yearly rent. Her auburn hair was swept up into a perfect chignon, and her diamond earrings glinted in the soft lighting. But what struck me most wasn't her wealth. It was the way her eyes widened the moment she saw me, as if she had just seen a ghost. I shifted uncomfortably as she approached my table. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling. "May I sit?" I hesitated before nodding. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "You look just like her," she whispered. I frowned. "Like who?" She inhaled shakily. "My daughter, Evelyn." I didn't know what to say. "She passed away last year," the woman continued, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. I know this sounds strange, but I have a proposal for you." A cold unease settled in my stomach. "What kind of proposal?" She took a deep breath, composing herself. "I'd like to pay you to pretend to be my daughter." I blinked, convinced I had misheard her. "You want me to what?" Her gaze was steady, desperate yet hopeful. "Live in my home. Wear her clothes. Attend the events she was meant to attend. Just for a little while." She hesitated, then added softly, "I'll pay you handsomely." My mind raced. It was absurd. It was insane. But then I thought of my empty fridge, my overdue rent, the crushing weight of survival. And perhaps more than anything, I thought of what it might feel like to be wanted, even if only for a lie. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. "You want me to pretend to be your daughter?" The woman, Mrs. Caldwell, as she introduced herself, nodded, her elegant composure barely concealing the desperation in her eyes. "Yes, just for a short time." A million questions swirled in my head, but only one came out. "Why me?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the table. I hesitated before picking it up, my breath catching as I looked at the girl in the picture. She could have been my twin. Same heart-shaped face, same dark eyes, same wavy chestnut hair. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought I was staring at an old photo of myself. "You see it, don't you?" Mrs. Caldwell whispered. "The resemblance is uncanny." I did see it, and that made the whole thing even more unnerving. "But why would you want me to do this? I mean, wouldn't that just make things harder?" Her lips trembled slightly, and she folded her hands together as if gathering strength. "I lost Evelyn in a car accident last year. She was my only child. My world." She took a breath, pressing on. "I know I can't bring her back, but I have an important charity gala next month. It was meant to be her debut into society. It would mean everything to me if she could be there, if only in spirit." My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about money or appearances. This was grief, raw and aching. Still, it felt insane. "You want me to lie to everyone?" "Only to my social circle," she clarified. I need a little more time before I let her go." Her voice broke slightly before she quickly composed herself. "I'll pay you $10,000 for the month." I nearly choked. 10,000. Yes. A wardrobe, etiquette lessons, everything you need. And if you do well, there could be more. It was crazy. It was deceitful. But as I thought about my empty bank account, my hopeless routine, and the look in Mrs. Caldwell's eyes, I realized something. I had nothing to lose. And maybe, just maybe, I had something to gain. The next morning, I found myself standing outside a townhouse so extravagant it looked like something out of a movie. Gilded gates, pristine hedges, a grand entrance with white marble steps. It was a world apart from my tiny studio apartment. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. This was insane. Pretending to be someone else, stepping into a life that wasn't mine. What if I got caught? What if I made a fool of myself? But then I thought about the $10,000. About how it could change everything. Rent paid, real food, maybe even a new start. I rang the doorbell before I could change my mind. Mrs. Caldwell greeted me with a small, hopeful smile. "I'm glad you came." She led me inside, and I barely kept my jaw from dropping. Chandeliers, rich mahogany furniture, portraits lining the walls. This house wasn't just wealth, it was legacy. And I was about to become part of it, even if only for a month. "Come," she said, gesturing toward a grand staircase. "I want to show you your room." Your room. It felt surreal hearing those words. But when we reached the second floor and stepped into Evelyn's bedroom, my breath caught. Everything was untouched. A vanity still lined with perfume bottles. A bed neatly made with pale pink sheets. A book on the nightstand with a bookmark peeking out, as if Evelyn might return any moment to finish reading. Mrs. Caldwell watched me carefully. "You don't have to rush. Take your time adjusting." But adjusting to what? Being someone else? That night, as I lay in Evelyn's bed, I stared at the ceiling, anxiety curling around my chest. Could I really do this? Could I wear her clothes, walk in her shoes, pretend to be a girl with a life so different from my own? I almost packed my bag and left. But then I remembered the way Mrs. Caldwell had looked at me, not just with desperation, but with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. The next morning, my training began. "You slouch when you walk," Maria, Mrs. Caldwell's assistant, pointed out as she circled me like a hawk. Evelyn never slouched. She walked with purpose. I straightened my back, feeling ridiculous in the designer dress I had been given. It wasn't just the clothes. Everything felt foreign. The way I was supposed to sit, the way I was supposed to sip my tea, even the way I was expected to smile. Maria sighed, shaking her head. "If you're going to pull this off, you need to become Evelyn. That means learning how to move like her, talk like her, think like her." Easy for her to say. I had spent my life blending in, staying unnoticed. Evelyn had been raised to shine. Still I tried. Every day, I studied her old videos, mimicked her laugh, memorized the way she carried herself. I learned to hold a champagne glass with effortless grace, to make polite conversation with the house staff, to answer to the name Evelyn without hesitation. It was exhausting. And yet, beneath the nerves, something strange happened. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Dressing in silk and lace, walking with my chin high, learning to speak with confidence, it was intoxicating. I had spent years feeling small, invisible, like I didn't matter. But here, in this house, in this role, I was someone. One afternoon, Mrs. Caldwell called me to the garden for tea. I expected her to correct something, my posture, my speech, but instead, she studied me with a soft expression. "You're doing well," she murmured. I glanced down, uncomfortable. "I'm just following instructions." She shook her head. "No, it's more than that. You remind me of her." My stomach tightened. "I'm not her." "No," she admitted. "But there's something in you," something she had. A quiet strength, a desire to belong. I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure where Evelyn ended and I began. The first time I stepped out in public as Evelyn, I thought I might faint. Mrs. Caldwell had arranged a small luncheon at an upscale cafe, nothing extravagant, just a casual meeting with a few of Evelyn's old acquaintances. But to me, it felt like stepping onto a stage without knowing my lines. Maria had prepped me for everything. How to order, how to hold my silverware, how to laugh at the right moments. But as soon as I walked in and saw the expectant faces of Evelyn's friends, girls who had known her, loved her, panic clawed at my throat. I was an imposter. A fraud. "Darling, it's been ages." A blonde girl air-kissed my cheeks, her perfume suffocatingly sweet. "We thought you disappeared on us." I forced a smile. "Just taking time for myself. Mrs. Caldwell, seated beside me, gave an approving nod. The conversation flowed around me, talk of vacations, designer sales, some scandal involving a senator's son, but I could barely focus. Every time someone looked at me too long, my pulse spiked. Were they noticing the differences? Did they see through me? Then it happened. "Your voice sounds different," one of the girls, Camille, remarked, tilting her head. "And your hair, it's darker than I remember." My stomach plummeted. Mrs. Caldwell intervened smoothly. The doctors told her to rest her vocal cords after the accident, hence the difference. And she darkened her hair as part of her healing process. You know, new beginnings. Camille narrowed her eyes, but didn't press further. I exhaled silently, grateful for the save, but the experience rattled me. If they noticed small things, how long before someone figured out the truth? As days passed, the weight of deception grew heavier. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw Evelyn's reflection staring back, but I wasn't her. Late at night, when the house was silent, I would stand in front of her vanity, touching the expensive makeup, the delicate jewelry, the life she had left behind. And I'd whisper the question that haunted me: who am I becoming? One evening, after another exhausting etiquette lesson, I collapsed onto the bed, rubbing my temples. Maria had been particularly harsh that day, scolding me over my improper table manners. Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway, watching me quietly. "You're struggling," she said gently. I sighed. I don't know if I can keep this up." She walked over, placing a cool hand on my shoulder. "You're doing better than you think." I shook my head. It's not just about pretending. It's that, sometimes, I forget who I was before this. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. She didn't answer right away. Then, she said something that stayed with me. "Maybe it's not about forgetting who you were. Maybe it's about discovering who you could be." The words settled deep inside me. I wasn't just pretending anymore. I was transforming. But whether that transformation was a lie or something real, I still didn't know. The night of the gala arrived, and with it, my moment of truth. The dress was a masterpiece, deep emerald satin that hugged my figure and flowed effortlessly with every step. Maria had spent hours styling my hair into cascading waves, and the makeup she applied was softer than usual, more me. Not just Evelyn. As I stood before the mirror, my breath caught. For the first time since stepping into this role, I wasn't just seeing Evelyn's reflection. I was seeing myself. My posture was straighter, my expression more poised. There was no hesitation in my stance, no fear in my eyes. I had spent so long pretending that I hadn't realized something profound had happened. I had become comfortable in this identity. Not just as Evelyn, but as the person I was allowed to be in her place. Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway, her gaze sweeping over me. Something in her expression softened. "You look stunning," she said. But there was something else in her voice, pride. I turned to face her. "Do you think they'll believe I'm her?" She stepped closer, adjusting an earring. "They already do." For the first time, I didn't feel like an imposter. At the gala, the room shimmered with chandeliers, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. People turned to look as I entered, admiration flickering in their eyes. I walked through the crowd with ease, smiling, conversing, no longer second-guessing every word or movement. I had spent weeks molding myself into Evelyn's world, but tonight, I wasn't just playing a role, I was owning it. Camille approached, her sharp gaze scrutinizing me. "You're different," she said, sipping her champagne. "More confident than before." I met her gaze steadily. Maybe I just needed time to find myself. She smirked, clearly intrigued. "Well, whatever you did, it worked." The night continued, and with each passing conversation, I felt something shift inside me. The doubts that had plagued me, the fear of being caught, the constant sense of not belonging, it all melted away. Mrs. Caldwell stood beside me, watching with quiet satisfaction. "You were right," I told her, voice steady. "About what?" I smiled. "That this isn't about forgetting who I was. It's about discovering who I could be." She lifted her glass. "To new beginnings, then." As I clinked my glass against hers, I knew this wasn't just about pretending to be someone else. It was about embracing the person I had always been too afraid to become. The night had gone smoothly, almost too smoothly. I had played my part perfectly, gliding through conversations with grace, my confidence unwavering. But as the evening drew to a close, the weight of my transformation settled on my shoulders. I wasn't just pretending anymore. I wasn't sure where the act ended and I began. Then Camille approached again, this time with a knowing glint in her eye. "You know," she murmured, tilting her glass toward me. "I always found it strange that Evelyn never mentioned a twin." My heart stuttered. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Camille leaned in, voice dripping with amusement. "You play the part well, I'll give you that. But there's something different about you. And I can't shake the feeling that it's not just a change of heart." I swallowed, keeping my composure, but panic clawed at my ribs. "I don't know what you mean." She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a predator testing its prey. "I wonder," she mused, swirling her drink, "what everyone else would think if they knew the truth." I clenched my fists, every instinct screaming at me to run, to deny, to beg her to keep quiet. But then I caught sight of Mrs. Caldwell across the room, watching me, trusting me, and suddenly I knew. I was done running. Straightening my shoulders, I met Camille's gaze head-on. "Then go ahead," I said, my voice steady. "Tell them." For the first time, she looked taken aback. "What?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Tell them I'm not Evelyn. Tell them the woman standing here tonight is someone else entirely. Because you know what? I don't care anymore." I exhaled, the weight lifting from my chest. "I like who I've become." Camille stared at me, her smirk fading. She had expected fear, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Mrs. Caldwell appeared beside me, resting a hand on my arm. "If you were hoping to ruin the evening, Camille," she said coolly, "I suggest you find a different target." For the first time since this all began, I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for the illusion to shatter. This wasn't an act. This was me, and I wasn't going to hide anymore. The gala had been my test, and I had passed, not because I had fooled them all, but because I had finally stopped trying to. The next morning, I sat across from Mrs. Caldwell in the sunlit breakfast room. There was no need for pretense anymore, no lingering fear that I would be exposed. "So," she said, stirring her tea, "what now?" I had spent weeks pretending to be her daughter, but in doing so, I had discovered something far greater, who I truly wanted to be. I met her gaze, no longer hesitant. "I don't think I can go back to the way things were," I admitted. "Not after this." A small smile touched her lips. "Then don't." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She set her cup down with a graceful clink. "You've grown into someone remarkable, poised, confident, unafraid. That's not something you should leave behind." She leaned forward slightly. "If you want to continue this life, not as Evelyn, but as yourself, I'll support you." The offer hit me like a shockwave. She wasn't asking me to keep pretending. She was asking me to be me, unapologetically. For so long, I had been lost, drifting through life as if waiting for something to change. And now, sitting here in this grand house, wearing clothes that once felt like a costume but now felt like home, I realized I had already changed. I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. "I think I'd like that." From that moment on, I wasn't living someone else's life. I was creating my own. No more pretending. No more hiding. Just me. Life has a way of leading us to unexpected places, sometimes through deception, sometimes through fate, but always with purpose. What began as a performance turned into something real, something undeniable. The truth is, we don't always know who we are until we step outside the roles we've been given. Sometimes, it takes pretending to be someone else to realize who we were meant to be all along. Self-discovery isn't about fitting into expectations. It's about embracing the person you've always been beneath the surface. And once you find that person, you owe it to yourself to never hide again. Because the most powerful transformation isn't becoming someone new, it's finally allowing yourself to be you.